Ren Calloway had a system. It wasn't a good system. It wasn't a safe system. But it was hers, and in 19 years of living, it was the only thing she could say belonged to her completely. The system was simple. Don't exist too loudly. Don't take up space anyone else wants. Don't make eye contact with people who look like they're deciding something. Don't make noise that invites questions. Don't make anyone feel like they need to do something about you. Be invisible. Stay alive. Move on before anyone gets the chance to decide what category you fall into. Kingman, Arizona in November was the kind of cold that fooled people who had never slept outside. It didn't snow. The sun still showed up during the day and warmed the pavement enough that tourists walking between their cars and the diner doors thought the desert was gentle, manageable, the kind of place where you could wear a light jacket in the afternoon and feel fine about it. But at night, once that sun dropped behind the Black Mountains to the west, the temperature fell off a cliff and the wind came through the streets with a personal grudge. It cut through thin hoodies like they were tissue paper. It turned exposed skin to something that ached all the way down to the bone. A deep cold that wasn't dramatic about itself, just insistent and patient. The kind of cold that didn't need to announce itself because it was already inside everything. Wren had been in Kingman for 11 days. Before that, Flagstaff. Before that, a string of small towns she'd moved through like a rumor present. For a moment, then gone before anyone could decide what to do about her. Wickenburg, Congress, Wickiup. Names on signs she'd read from the shoulder of the highway walking, when she couldn't hitching, when her feet gave out always moving in the particular direction of a way. She'd chosen the alley behind the Sunrise Diner on Andy Devine Avenue because of three things. The dumpster blocked the worst of the wind when it came from the east. The kitchen exhaust vent pushed warm air down into the alley around 10 o'clock during final cleanup, and she'd learned to position herself in its drift. And the diner didn't close until 11 p.m., which meant the alley had ambient light from the back door and ambient noise from inside low human presence that kept the darkest kind of darkness away. The darkness that had nothing to do with the absence of light. She wasn't eating from the dumpster. She needed that said clearly, even if only to herself. She had $14.60. She'd eaten a gas station burrito at noon. She could make it until morning, and then she'd figure out the next thing. She was always figuring out the next thing. That was the other part of the system. Forward motion. Not optimism. She'd lost the shape of optimism somewhere around the fourth month, just forward motion. Keep moving, and the worst things couldn't quite catch up. She was sitting with her back against the brick wall, knees pulled to her chest, a flattened cardboard box under her, when she noticed the truck. It was parked in front of the bar, 2 doors down from the diner, half visible from where she sat. A big pickup lifted chrome running boards, the kind of truck that announced money spent on performance that would never be used. It had come in fast for the narrow street, angled into the space, with the casual disregard of someone who had never once worried about what other drivers thought. 3 of them got out. She knew the type immediately. Not from any single experience, but from the accumulation of 8 months of watching people from positions where they couldn't see her. You learn types fast when you live the way she lived. These were the ones who moved through the world like the world had been configured specifically for them, and any evidence to the contrary was a glitch to be corrected. Early 20s, expensive clothes worn carelessly. The particular volume of men who had never been in a situation where being loud cost them anything. The tall one in front, she'd seen him before she realized she was placing him. Then it landed. Whitfield. The name had been on a newspaper she'd used to line her shoes against the cold outside of Flagstaff 3 weeks back. She hadn't read the article carefully. She'd been focused on the insulating properties of newsprint. But the name had stayed anyway, the way certain things stayed when you were in the habit of cataloging information, because information was currency when you had nothing else. The article had been about a lawsuit, a college student who'd worked for the family's real estate company. A settlement reached out of court, an attorney's statement about the matter being resolved to all parties' satisfaction. The student's face hadn't been in the article. The settlement terms were sealed. The Whitfield name was on 4 different buildings in downtown Kingman. She'd counted them the way she counted things because knowing the landscape meant knowing your options. The tall one was Cole Whitfield. She was nearly certain of it. The jawline, the way he held himself, the unhurried ownership of whatever space he was currently occupying. The specific confidence of a young man who had been told his entire life that his appearance was the opening argument in every room he entered, and who had never yet encountered a room that disagreed. She watched them disappear into the bar. She pressed herself a little tighter against the brick wall and returned to the business of managing the cold. 20 minutes later, she heard the motorcycle. Not a sport bike, not one of the modern machines that sounded like an angry appliance. This was something older and heavier, a sound with actual weight behind it, a low mechanical thunder that she felt in her sternum before she fully processed it with her ears. It had a particular quality, that sound not aggressive, just substantial. The sound of something that had been built to last and had been given the time to prove it. It pulled into the small parking area behind the diner and idled for a moment before cutting off. In the sudden silence, the alley felt different, occupied in a new way. She pressed herself tighter against the wall. This was instinct more than decision. Her whole body knew the protocol before her mind finished running the calculation. Stay still, stay small, be nothing. Whatever this was, the correct response was to not exist loudly enough to become part of it. The man who climbed off the bike was old. She could tell that even in the half-dark, even from her tucked position behind the dumpster. He moved like old, a careful negotiation with gravity, a slight hesitation before his boots found the ground, the posture of a body that had collected decades of hard miles in its joints and was presenting the bill one payment at a time. He was big, though, not tall, maybe 5'10", but wide across the shoulders in a way that had nothing to do with youth, the kind of wide that came from decades of physical work and didn't apologize for anything. He wore a leather vest over a long-sleeve thermal dark jeans, boots that had been everywhere, and remembered all of it. A heavy jacket over the vest, she could see the bottom edge of leather at the hem, could tell there was something underneath, but couldn't make out what. His gray hair was pushed back from his face. His beard was thick and kept the kind a man maintained out of self-respect rather than fashion. He stretched his back carefully. She heard the faint sound of joints resettling after a long ride. Then he turned his head and did a slow read of the alley the same way an experienced person scanned an unfamiliar space. Not paranoid, just thorough, not wanting to miss anything. His eyes landed on her. She stopped breathing. He looked at her for a long moment, not alarmed, not disgusted, not calculating. He just looked the way a man looked at something he wanted to understand correctly before he responded to it. Taking his time, getting it right. Then he said, "Cold tonight," and turned and walked toward the diner's back door. That was all. Ren exhaled slowly. Her hands were shaking, and she pressed them flat against her thighs and told them to stop. He hadn't told her to leave. He hadn't threatened her. He hadn't taken out his phone. He hadn't done any of the things people did when they found her. The stiffening, the deliberate not looking, the calling of management or authorities. The particular kind of concerned voice that was really just discomfort wearing a more socially acceptable face. He had acknowledged her existence in 3 words and moved on. It was such a small thing. It wrecked her anyway. She sat there in the cold and tried to remember the last time anyone had spoken to her without wanting something from her or wanting her gone. It took a while. She came up with maybe 2 instances in the last 5 months, and one of them was a social worker who'd been legally required to speak to her and whose tone made the legal requirement obvious. The back door of the diner opened 10 minutes later. The man came out carrying a paper bag and 2 cups. He walked back to his bike, set 1 cup on the seat, and then turned and walked directly to her. No hesitation, no performance of reluctance, just a man who had made a decision and was carrying it out. He crouched down about 3 feet from her, close enough that he didn't have to raise his voice far enough that he wasn't crowding her, and held out the bag and the 2nd cup. "Turkey melt and coffee," he said. "You like turkey?" She stared at him. "It's fine if you don't. I could go back and get something else, but the turkey melt here is good." A brief pause. "Coffee's regular, no tricks, just coffee." She hadn't been offered food by a stranger without conditions attached in. She counted backward. felt something hollow open up in her chest at the number 91 days. 91 days since anyone had placed food in front of her without a sermon or a form to fill out, or the particular expectation of gratitude that was really just another form of payment. Why, she said. Her voice came out rougher than she expected. She hadn't used it much today. Because it's cold and you haven't eaten, he said. The way he said it, it was math. It was as obvious as explaining why the sky got dark at night. You don't know if I've eaten. No, he agreed. Have you? She looked at the bag. The smell reached her, then warm bread. Something real, something with substance, and her stomach contracted with a sharpness that had nothing to do with pride or dignity. She was 19 years old, and she had $14.60, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. She took the bag. Thank you, she said. It felt small. It felt like the wrong size for what it was. Sure. He didn't make a production of it. He didn't look at her with the heavy, meaningful eyes people got when they were performing generosity. He just stood back up his left knee, making its position known in the process, and went back to his bike. She opened the bag. Turkey melt, still hot. She ate half of it before she remembered to slow down because eating too fast when you hadn't eaten enough was its own kind of problem. She made herself breathe between bites. She drank the coffee. It was exactly what he'd said, dark and plain, so hot it stung the back of her throat, and then spread warmth through her chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the liquid and everything to do with the fact of it. She watched him eat his own food sitting on a bench near the back door, reading something on his phone completely unbothered, not stealing glances at her, not waiting for gratitude to be performed adequately. He just ate and read and existed in the alley with the same settled quality he'd had when he'd first looked at her. She finished the sandwich. She drank the rest of the coffee. She set the empty cup down carefully beside her. For approximately 12 minutes, she felt like a human being. She didn't fully trust the feeling anymore, but she let herself have it. I'm Ren, she said eventually. He looked up from his phone. Hank, he said. That your real name? Real enough. He put his phone away. He was 63, she found out. He'd ridden since his mid-20s. He had a bad knee that was probably due for its third surgery and kept failing to get scheduled because there was always something more urgent on the calendar. He liked black coffee and was skeptical of people who ordered complicated things. He'd worked construction for over 30 years and could still read a blueprint faster than most men half his age. He had a dog at home, a big shepherd named Cal, currently being watched by his neighbor Carol, who was not naturally gifted with animals, but was excellent at following instructions. How long have you been out here? He asked at some point. Not pushing, just asking. She thought about lying. The lie would have been 6 weeks bad enough to explain her situation, short enough not to trigger the alarm that led people to make calls. Instead, she told the truth. She still wasn't sure why. Almost 8 months, she said. He didn't wince. He didn't recoil. He said, that's a long time, and meant it without making it a judgment. How old are you? 19. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you from around here? No. Where from? She hesitated. Tucson originally. Family. One word. And there was the whole topography of it. The apartment on Euclid Avenue, the smell of yesterday's anger baked into the walls, the chain lock she'd learned to work silently when she was 11, the sound of a certain truck in the parking lot at 2 in the morning, and what that sound meant, and how she'd learned to read it from 2 floors up through a closed window. Not really, she said. He nodded. He didn't push. He accepted it the way a man accepted weather, not approving, not disapproving, just acknowledging that it was what it was. You have a plan, he asked instead. Keep moving, she said. Stay ahead of the worst of winter. I know which towns have shelters that don't ask too many questions. He looked at her steadily, not with pity, not with the gentle condescension she'd gotten from people who thought they were being kind, just with the attention of a man listening to a practical problem being described by someone who had spent real time thinking about it. Okay, he said. I can see that. There was no sarcasm in it. He genuinely seemed to mean it, that she had figured something out, that she was managing something difficult in real time, and that this was worth acknowledging. You ride alone, she asked, because she needed to redirect the conversation before it went somewhere her chest couldn't handle. Tonight, he said. Not usually. Where are you headed? Nowhere urgent, just moving for a while. I do that sometimes. She understood that more than she wanted to say. They talked for a while after that, about the route he'd taken through the mountains, the particular quality of the desert in November, when the light went low and the color of the rock changed in a way that didn't happen any other month. A place in Seligman that made extraordinary pie coconut cream, which she wouldn't have guessed, but he described it with the specificity of someone who had made the detour more than once specifically for it. He talked to her the way you talk to another person, peer to peer, idea to idea, not the way most adults had talked to her for the past 8 months, which was carefully and slightly elevated in volume and register, like she was very young and very broken and needed the transmission adjusted to reach her. Hank Dillard talked to her normal. It felt like a gift she didn't have a name for. The kitchen exhaust vent kicked on at 10:12. The warm air rolled down the alley and she let herself lean slightly into it. You should have a warmer jacket than that, he said, looking at her hoodie. I had one. It got taken. His jaw shifted slightly. Taken. Just that the single word landing with the weight of someone who understood exactly what it meant and was choosing not to make it about his reaction to it. Hold on, he said, and went to his bike. He came back carrying a rolled bundle from the saddlebag. He held it out to her. It was a flannel-lined denim jacket worn to the specific soft that took years to earn. She could feel, even before she put it on, that it had stored warmth from wherever it had been packed. I don't need. You're going to take it, he said, but quietly. No command in it. It's just a jacket. Been sitting in that bag 2 weeks. Do something useful with it. She held it. The instinct to refuse was strong. Accepting things created obligation, and obligation was a door she'd learned to keep locked. But there was something in the way he'd said it that stripped the transaction out of it entirely, made it practical, made sentimentality irrelevant. She put it on. It was several sizes too large. The sleeves came past her knuckles. She didn't care. It settled across her shoulders with a weight that was its own kind of comfort, and it smelled like motor oil and something dry and cedar-like, and it was warm immediately. Thank you, she said again. Yeah, he said, and went back to his bench. They were quiet for a while. The kitchen finished up inside, the exhaust vent cut off. The alley got colder, but she was warmer. She didn't hear the truck until it was already turning into the back lot. It came in fast, the lifted pickup chrome catching what light there was, tires throwing gravel. It parked crooked across 2 spaces, the way you parked when you believed the lines had been put there for other people. 3 of them got out. She recognized them before she recognized what was happening. Cole Whitfield, first the height, the jawline, the way he moved through space with the assumption that space would rearrange itself to accommodate him. Garrett Foss behind him, stocky and restless, with the particular energy of someone who needed something to happen tonight and hadn't found it yet. And a third one, Leland Pruitt, quieter, hanging back in the way of someone present, because leaving would require an explanation he didn't want to give. They were drunk, all of them. Not stumbling drunk, the worst kind. The kind that stripped out whatever small restraint they carried in ordinary life and left what was underneath exposed and operational. Hank had turned his head at the sound of the truck. He was reading them the way a man watched a storm front moving in, not alarmed, just tracking, wanting to understand what was coming before it arrived. Look at this, Cole said, and she knew from his voice what he was looking at. Not her. Hank. Old man on an old bike. Cole moved toward the Harley, not hurrying. The kind of approach that announced itself because announcing was the point. You get lost retirement homes the other direction. Hank didn't respond. He finished the last of his coffee and set the cup down with the careful placement of a man who intended to stand up next. Nice bike, though. Garrett said, moving toward it with the restless energy that had been looking for a direction all night and had found one. What is this, like an antique? Don't touch it. Hank's voice was calm, not loud, not threatening, just completely clear, the clarity of a man who said exactly what he meant and had been doing so for 63 years and saw no reason to change the practice now. Garrett stopped walking. Then he smiled, because the smile was the correct response to someone telling you what to do when you had decided tonight was about the fact that nobody told you what to do. Did this old guy just tell me what to do? He asked Cole. I think he did, Cole said. Don't touch it, Hank said again. Same tone, same clarity. Watching them the way an experienced man watched a situation he'd seen variations of before, reading it without letting it read him. Garrett reached out and put his hand flat on the gas tank. Wren pressed herself back against the wall. Her heart was going fast. She knew how this math worked. She'd watched the math of 3 drunk young men who decided on a target before, and the answer was always the same. What she hadn't expected, what she couldn't have prepared herself for, was that Hank would stand up. He stood up slowly, all the way, his full width. His 63 years of knowing exactly who he was and not needing anyone else's acknowledgement of it. He looked at Garrett, at the hand on the tank, and he said, "Last time." "Last time what?" Garrett said. "Last time what, old man?" Cole had moved closer. Leland had angled around to Hank's left side. She recognized the positioning, the way bodies arrange themselves without instruction, when they'd done this before, or when they'd watched enough of it to know the geometry. "All 3 of you," Hank said, and now his voice was quieter, which was somehow worse than loud would have been. "Whatever tonight is for you, it doesn't need to go this direction. Walk away." "We're just admiring the bike," Cole said. He reached out and shoved the handlebars. The Harley rocked on its kickstand, settled, rocked again before it stilled. Something moved in Hank's face. Not rage, something harder than rage. Something Wren would spend a long time thinking about afterward. Not the face of a man losing control. The face of a man who had just finished deciding. He stepped forward. It was 3-on-1, and Hank Dillard was 63 years old. She would give him this. He didn't go down easy. He got Garrett clean across the jaw, and the sound of it was ugly and real, and Garrett dropped, and for 4 seconds, it looked like it might be different than she knew it was going to be. Then Cole and Leland got hold of him, and the numbers did what numbers did. Wren was small. She had $14.60. She had survived 8 months by being invisible, and her whole body was shaking hard enough that she could feel it in her teeth. Every rule she had said: stay still, stay small, do not exist right now. This is not yours to fix. This is not a fight you can change the outcome of. The system existed because the system worked, and the system said, be nothing. She moved. She came out from behind the dumpster. She crossed the alley in steps she couldn't account for. Later, she wouldn't remember deciding to take them, only taking them. She went down to her knees on the pavement beside Hank, and she put herself over him, her body over his, and she said the only thing that came to her. Get away from him. Her voice cracked. It was barely a whisper. She was 87 pounds in a borrowed flannel-lined jacket 3 sizes too big, and she put herself between Hank Dillard and what was coming next because she could not watch it anymore, and she was not going to. Cole looked down at her. There was a flicker of genuine amusement on his face, the absurdity of it registering visually, a 19-year-old girl covering a man's body with her own on the concrete of a diner parking lot. Then the amusement went somewhere else. Something replaced it. Move, he said. No, she said. She felt Hank's hand grip her arm from underneath. His voice came up through the dark, strained and low. Girl, go. Go now. No, she said again. She couldn't have explained it to anyone in a way that would have made sense. She just knew she was not going to move. This man had given her a turkey melt and a cup of coffee in a jacket, and he had talked to her like she existed, and she had not had that in 91 days, and she was not going to move. Cole's boot connected with her ribs. The pain was not a word. It was a full-body electrical event that shot from her left side up through her chest and into her jaw, and she heard herself make a sound she didn't recognize as coming from herself. She felt the rib give the specific sick sensation of something structural surrendering. She didn't move. The second kick came lower and harder, and her vision went white at the edges and then gray at the center, and she pressed herself tighter against Hank's chest. His heartbeat under her ear, fast but present. Still there. As long as she was here, they had to go through her to get to him. That was the entire math. That was all of it. Then she heard Leland Pruitt's voice from somewhere above her. Not cruel, not amused. Something different. Something sharp and startled. Then Cole went quiet. Then the air in the alley changed. The pressure of it. The temperature of it. Like a switch had been thrown in a room she hadn't known was powered. Is that? Garrett's voice from somewhere behind her. The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Then someone ran. She heard boots on gravel. She heard the truck's engine turning over fast, flooding it, trying again, catching tires, screaming against the pavement as it tore out of the lot. And then it was quiet. Hank's jacket had come open at the collar in the struggle. She hadn't seen it. She'd been face down on the pavement, vision narrowing, managing the pain. But Cole had seen it. Leland had seen it. And what they saw in the vest underneath had turned 3 drunk young men into 3 people who needed to be somewhere else immediately. Wren didn't know what was on the vest. She would find out later. In that moment, she only knew that they had gone, and that Hank was still breathing under her, and that her ribs were filing a detailed objection that her entire nervous system was receiving loud and clear. "You didn't run," Hank said from beneath her. His voice was battered and low, and carried something she had never heard from anyone before. Not quite pain, not quite wonder, not quite gratitude, but some combination of all 3 that didn't have a name in any language she'd been taught. "No," she said. "Why?" She thought about it. She tried to find something that sounded like sense and came up with nothing that wasn't exactly what it was. "Because you talked to me like I was a person," she said, "and I haven't had that in a while." Hank Dillard went very still beneath her. She could feel his chest rise and fall. She could feel him working through something she couldn't name. Then his hand came up and pressed gently against her shoulder blade. Not quite a hug, not quite anything she had a word for, but something that registered in her body as the opposite of alone. "You're going to be okay," he said. "Help is coming." She wanted to ask how he knew that. She wanted to ask what Cole had seen when the jacket came open. She wanted to ask what was on that vest. She wanted to ask a lot of things. But her vision was narrowing. The pain in her ribs was doing something complex and centralizing. The alley was moving in a slow rotation that it had no business making. The last thing she heard before everything went dark was Hank's voice not talking to her anymore, talking into something she couldn't see, low and serious and completely steady. "Dispatch, this is Hank. I'm down. Send the club." And somewhere very far away, like the first rumble of something enormous, building itself into existence in the dark, she thought she heard motorcycles. Not 1, not 10. Something that kept adding to itself. Something that didn't stop. She came back in pieces. Not all at once, not the way waking up was supposed to work, that clean transition from nothing to something, from dark to present. It was more like a radio signal finding a station through heavy interference, the kind that gave you a second of clarity and then dropped back into static before you could hold on to what you'd heard. The first time she surfaced, someone was saying something about a pneumothorax. Another voice answered closer, saying, "Get me a chest tube ready." Hands on her that were efficient and entirely impersonal, the hands of people who dealt with broken bodies, the way mechanics dealt with engines, with competence and without sentiment. She tried to say, "Wait," and nothing came out. The gray took her back. The second time she heard Hank, she couldn't make out the words, just the register, that particular low, unhurried quality, the voice of a man who had spent decades not wasting syllables. She tried to move toward it, and her ribs informed her in terms that required no interpretation that she was not moving anywhere. She made a sound. "Hey," his voice closer now. "Stay still. You're in the hospital. You're okay." She opened her eyes. The light was institutional and flat, and she closed them again immediately. Too bright, she managed. She heard him shift, the drag of a curtain across a rod. When she opened her eyes the second time, the light had softened to something survivable. Hank was sitting in a chair that looked engineered specifically to be uncomfortable, positioned about 4 feet from her bed. His face had 3 distinct bruises climbing his left jaw. His right eye was swollen to a slit. His bottom lip had been split and taped. He was still wearing the thermal, but the heavy jacket and the vest were gone, and she could see for the first time how old the damage to his hands was. Knuckles that had been broken and reset and broken again across 30-some years of work and living the hands of a man who had built things and occasionally encountered things that needed to be dealt with differently. Despite everything, he looked absolutely settled, like a man sitting in his own kitchen on a Tuesday morning. "What time is it?" she asked. "Almost 3. In the morning." Yeah, she processed that. She lost roughly 4 hours. She ran a quiet internal inventory, both hands present, feet responding, the ribs on her left side, a specific kind of wrong that went beyond pain into something mechanical. Not just hurt, structurally compromised. A drain from her chest she could feel without seeing. A tube in her left arm. A monitor on her finger. 2 cracked ribs, Hank said, reading her face. "One of them got the lung part way. They fixed it. You're breathing on both sides now." "That's good," she said. "Generally preferable." She almost laughed. The almost laugh cost her. She pressed her hand carefully against her left side and waited for the wave to pass. "You okay?" she asked when it did. "Concussion. 3 cracked ribs myself. Busted lip. Cracked 2 knuckles." He said it the way you'd itemize a grocery list. No drama attached to any of it. "The doctor wanted you in a bed." Doctor wanted a lot of things. He settled back slightly in the chair. "I told him I'd be over here." "You didn't have to." "I know I didn't have to." His voice wasn't harsh. It simply closed the door on that particular line of reasoning. He hadn't stayed because he had to. That was what he was telling her. And there was nothing to negotiate about it. She looked at the ceiling. The monitor beeped with its steady, indifferent rhythm. "After I went out," she said, "I heard you say something. Into a phone or a radio. You said send the club." Hank was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of a man deciding whether to tell the truth. The quiet of a man deciding how much of the truth needed explaining. "I made a call," he said, "to people who'd want to know I was down." "Who?" "People I ride with." She turned her head and looked at him. He met her eyes and didn't look away. He also didn't add anything, and the absence of addition was its own kind of answer. "The vest," she said. "I never saw it. I mean, I saw there was something under your jacket. They saw it. That's why they ran." "Yeah." "What does it say?" He looked at her for a long moment. She had the impression he was measuring something, not her trustworthiness exactly, but something more like her readiness. Whether she was the kind of person who could receive a particular piece of information and hold it correctly. "Hell's Angels," he said. The 2 words landed with a weight that needed no decoration. She'd heard the name her whole life, the way everyone had through news coverage, through the particular careful tone adults used when the subject came up, through the specific register of a name that meant something large and complicated and not fully available to people on the outside of it. "You're full patch member," he said. "Since '89, 35 years. She stared at him. The man who had bought her a turkey melt, who had given her a jacket that smelled like motor oil and cedar, who had talked to her like she was someone worth talking to. 35 years. "Those guys saw the patch," she said, working through it, "when your jacket came open while they had you on the ground." "Back patch," he said. "They got a good look at it." A pause. "If you hadn't held them there, if they'd finished what they started before the jacket came open." He stopped. Let the rest of the sentence exist without saying it. They had enough time to see it, and then they had enough sense to run. She thought about the kicks, the specific moment of the rib giving. The decision to stay that hadn't felt like a decision at all. I didn't know what was on the vest, she said. That's not why I did it. I know that. I just want to be clear about it. I know that, Ren. The way he said her name, not soft, not patronizing, just specific, like it was a thing that had weight, made her chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with the cracked ribs. That's exactly the point. She looked at the ceiling again. Her throat was doing something she needed it to stop doing. Are you in trouble? She asked. Because of this. Because you were alone when it happened. Something moved in his voice. Something almost like the beginning of amusement compressed down small. No, I'm not in trouble. She would understand why in the next few minutes. The understanding would rearrange several things she thought she knew about the night. There was a knock at the door. Not a nurse's knock. She'd already learned the nurse's knock, which was a courtesy tap followed immediately by entry because nurses were too busy to wait for invitation. This was slower, deliberate, the knock of someone who would wait. Come in, Hank said. The man who came through the door had been doing hard physical work since before most men in the room had started shaving, and his body had simply stopped pretending otherwise. The weight of it was permanent, now settled in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with accumulation. Mid-50s, dark hair going silver at the temples, a beard that was maintained without being precious about it. He wore a leather vest over a flannel shirt, and she could see the patches clearly, this time the same bottom rocker as Hank's, the same colors. He looked at Hank first. In that look was relief compressed into half a second before it became something neutral and steady again. The way men who cared about each other sometimes had to manage the caring in front of other people. You look like hell, old man, he said. You say that every time you see me, Hank said. Every time I see you, it's appropriate. He looked at Ren then. His gaze had the same quality as Hank's thorough, unhurried, not wanting to miss something important before he responded to it. He pulled the other chair in the room close to the bed and sat, which surprised her. Men who were in charge of things usually stood. Standing was its own statement. I'm Ray, he said. Ray McCready. She understood she was supposed to recognize the name. She didn't not specifically, but she registered the way Hank's posture had shifted when the man walked in. Not deference exactly, something more like alignment. The kind of adjustment that told you everything about the structure of things without a word being said. Ren Calloway, she said. I know, Ray said. Hank told me. He looked at Hank. How bad? 2 ribs, one got the lung a little, they fixed it. Ray nodded. He had the same quality. Hank had the ability to receive difficult information without making it about himself, without his face doing anything that required managing. It was a specific kind of steadiness she'd rarely encountered, and she found it unexpectedly calming. The 3 of them will be found, Ray said, and she realized he wasn't talking to her. He was talking to Hank. All 3. I know, Hank said. The one from the plates on that truck. Ray's voice was entirely level. Cole Whitfield. His father is Richard Whitfield. Whitfield Development, the real estate people. They have 4 buildings in this town. Money, Hank said. Serious money. The kind that's bought its way out of things before. Ray paused. That's not happening this time. The air in the room changed. Ren felt it, the shift from aftermath to intention, the moment a conversation stopped being about what had happened and started being about what was going to happen next. Outside, she said, because she could hear it now. Not through the window. This room faced an interior courtyard, but through the walls. A low vibration that her body registered as sound before her ears had finished sorting it. Rhythmic. Building. Not random. Ray looked at his watch. When I left, about 80 out front, more coming in from Laughlin and Needles. By now, he calculated briefly. Call it 150, maybe more. 150 people, she said. Give it another hour, Hank said. She looked between them. They came because of you. They came because one of ours went down, Hank said. That's the call. Goes out, people come. That's the whole thing. She absorbed that slowly. 150 people in the middle of the night outside a hospital in Kingman, Arizona. Because Hank Dillard had sent a signal and people came. And whoever had been with him when he went down mattered by extension. And the people who'd done the hurting were somewhere in the city, and this was a city that was not large, and those people were not going to move through it without being seen. They're looking for the three men, she said. They're handling it, Ray said. What does handling it mean? Ray looked at her. His face was unreadable, but his eyes weren't. His eyes were the eyes of a man who knew exactly what it meant and was choosing to give her the version of the answer that she could hold without dropping. It means those three won't hurt anyone else, he said. Tonight or after tonight. She examined herself for fear and found it wasn't there. What she found instead was something more complicated, something that felt, if she was being honest with herself, uncomfortably close to relief. She hadn't felt safe in 8 months. Not actually safe. The system had given her managed, it had given her temporarily stable, it had given her the particular invisibility that kept the worst things from finding you. But actual safety, the feeling that something stood between her and the next thing that wanted to hurt her, that had been gone for a very long time. A nurse came in to check her vitals. She took one look at Ray McCready sitting in the corner chair and said nothing except what she needed to say medically, and then left with the practiced composure of someone who had learned not to ask about things she didn't need to know. The doctor came in at 4:15. He was slight in his 40s with the kind of face constitutionally opposed to displaying whatever he was actually feeling. He checked her chart, checked the monitor, checked the drain, and then looked around the room at Hank and Ray and the presence they generated even while sitting still. She needs rest, he said. Genuine rest. Both of you, for that matter. I'm fine, Hank said. You have a concussion, the doctor said. I understand you feel fine. I need you to understand that the feeling is inaccurate. Hank looked at him with the look of a man considering whether this was a battle worth entering. I'm going to sit in this chair, he said finally. Then sit quietly, the doctor said, and there was something decided in his voice, the executive decision of a man who had identified the battle he wasn't going to fight tonight. He looked at Ren. You did well breathing through the pain. The ribs will take 4 to 6 weeks. The lung was minimal, you were fortunate. I want you here another 24 hours. I can't. That part isn't negotiable, he said. That's medical, not personal. He checked 2 more things on her chart, looked around the room one final time and left. Ray stood. I've got things to coordinate. I'll be back in a couple hours. He looked at Hank. Doc's right. Sleep. When did you start giving me orders? 1989, Ray said. You keep ignoring them. He looked at Ren. You need anything right now before I go. She thought about saying no. She thought about the system. Don't create obligation. Don't accept things. Keep the exits clean. But she was lying in a hospital bed with 2 cracked ribs and a chest drain, and the version of herself that ran the system felt very far away right now. There's a bag somewhere, she said. Whatever they put my clothes in when I came in. There's $14 in the pocket of the hoodie. It's everything I have. I don't want it to get lost. Ray McCready did not react to the number in any way she could see. I'll take care of it, he said. I just don't want it lost. She said, because she needed him to understand the problem was not the amount. The problem was that it was hers and it was all of it. I understand, he said, and then he left. She and Hank were alone again. Outside, the sound had reached a level that had become a constant, a sustained mechanical rumble that had settled into the background frequency of the night, the way weather settled, the way things became normal through sheer persistence. Are you scared? Hank asked, not looking at her, looking at the door. She considered the question honestly. Of what? Any of it? She thought about Cole Whitfield's boot, the rib giving, the gray she'd come back through in pieces, the doctor's voice saying pneumothorax, the sound of 150 motorcycles outside. I was scared in the alleys, she said. I was terrified the whole time. You didn't look it. I've had practice looking like I'm not scared. She shifted carefully, managing the ribs. I'm not scared right now. I think I should probably figure out why that is. Hank was quiet. The monitor beeped. Is it going to be okay, she asked. For you with the club, being out alone getting into something. Nobody blames me for this, Hank said. That's not how it works. How does it work? He looked at her. Family, he said. When one of us goes down, the rest come. That's the whole thing. 35 years and that hasn't changed once. She was quiet for a while. Her ribs ached with a deep, insistent regularity. I don't know what family is supposed to feel like, she said. She hadn't meant to say it. It came out the way things did at 4 in the morning in hospitals, when pain made honesty cheaper than it usually was. Hank turned and looked at her. His swollen eye, his taped lip, his 63 years in that chair. Yes, you do, he said. You figured it out in the alley. He paused. You just haven't had it pointed at you before. She didn't know what to do with that. So she looked at the ceiling and breathed carefully and let the sound of the motorcycles outside become the sound of something she didn't have a word for yet. Ray came back 2 hours later, moving differently than he had going out. More settled. The way a man settled when specific pieces of work had been completed correctly. Garrett Foss, he said, sitting down, is in the custody of the Mojave County Sheriff's Office. Aggravated assault. Assault with serious bodily injury. Public intoxication. A pause. He talked. Already, Hank said. Apparently the prospect of sitting in a motel parking lot without a lawyer while 200 people who know your face are within a quarter mile did significant things for his willingness to cooperate. Ray's voice was dry. He corroborated everything. The confrontation who initiated the sequence of the assault. He glanced at Wren. All of it. His testimony alone makes the case. The camera footage from the building across the alley confirms it. There's camera footage, Wren said. Got everything, Ray said. From when the truck pulled in. Something moved through her that she hadn't expected. She'd spent 8 months being invisible. The idea of being documented, actually present in evidence, actually witnessed, hit her in a strange place. Not quite relief. Something more complicated. Like the difference between surviving and having survived something that was now in the record. He also gave up where Cole was going, Ray said. The room shifted. Whitfield family property, Ray continued. About 20 miles northeast. Ranch-style house, private road fenced. Cole went there after. He paused, and in the pause was something close to contempt. He thought he was out of reach. The road has 3 entry points, Hank said. We've had people on all 3 since 4:30 this morning, Ray said. He checked his watch. Nearly 4 hours now. He's been surrounded since before sunrise. He looked at Wren. He doesn't know that yet, or he does by now. One of the two. She tried to construct the image. Cole Whitfield inside that house in the dark, waiting for his father's money to arrive and build a wall around him. And at some point, maybe with the first gray seeping through the windows, beginning to understand that the wall wasn't coming. That something else had gotten there first. Leland Pruitt, Ray said. The quiet one. He turned himself in, called a lawyer, walked into the sheriff's office at 6:15 this morning. He talked, Hank asked. He talked considerably more than Garrett. Ray allowed himself a small pause. Leland Pruitt, it turns out, has been uncomfortable with Cole Whitfield's particular habits for some time and simply lacked the structural excuse to do anything about it. Being arrested provided the structure. His voice was entirely level. Sometimes people just need a door to walk through. Wren said, what does Cole have on his record? Both men looked at her. The specificity of the question had surprised Ray slightly, she could tell. Not that she'd asked it, but that she'd asked it that way. 2 prior incidents, Ray said. Both resolved without charges. One involved a woman. One involved a college student who worked for his father's company. He paused. Both times the family's attorney was involved in the resolution. She'd already known about one of them. The newspaper under her shoes outside Flagstaff. The sealed settlement. The attorney's statement about all parties being satisfied. He was never going to stop, she said. No, Ray said. He wasn't. So this isn't just about me and Hank. Ray held her gaze. No, he said, it's not. Something resolved in her chest that hadn't been named. Not vengeance she was clear about, that with herself needed to be clear. It wasn't about what Cole's boot had felt like against her ribs or the specific sensation of something structural giving way. It was about the woman she didn't know and the college student she didn't know and the machinery that had run on their behalf and purchased an outcome and the people after them who now wouldn't have to find out what that felt like. Ray's phone rang. He looked at it and stood, and the change in his posture was immediate. The full attention of a man who had been waiting for a specific call, and it had arrived. Yeah, he said. A pause. How long ago? Not a question. Okay, hold position. He hung up. He looked at Hank. Cole Whitfield just tried to leave through the north gate. Private car hired driver. The driver saw what was waiting on the road and pulled over. A pause. Cole got out of the car, Ray said. The room was silent. Then what? Wren asked. Then he sat down on the hood of the car, Ray said. And he called his father. She almost felt something for him. Almost. The image of it, Cole Whitfield, 23 years old, the jawline still there, 20-some years of never arriving at the end of a road, sitting on the hood of a hired car on a private driveway surrounded by Hell's Angels, calling his father for a rescue that wasn't coming. Almost. Ray left to coordinate. He came back 40 minutes later with the specific energy of a man who had completed the last item on a list. He's in the back of a Mojave County Sheriff's vehicle, Ray said. All three are in custody. Outside, the sound shifted. Not louder, it was already everything it needed to be, but different. Like a pressure releasing. Like something that had been held taut, easing back into its resting state. Hank closed his eyes for 3 seconds. The way a man closed his eyes when he was done with something difficult and needed a breath before the next thing. Then a knock. Slower than the nurses. More deliberate. The woman who entered was in her 40s, dark hair pulled back, the kind of face that had been through something hard and had come out not diminished but denser. She held up a badge. Detective Shea Burnett, she said. Mojave County Sheriff's Office. I'm the lead on the assault case. She looked at Ray and Hank with the neutral expression of someone who had already made peace with the scene outside the hospital and was not going to spend time on it. Ms. Calloway, I need your formal statement when you're ready. I'm ready now, Wren said. Something shifted briefly in Burnett's expression. A small recalibration. She pulled out a recorder, set it on the bedrail, identified herself and the date and time, and looked at Wren. Start wherever feels right, she said. Wren started at the beginning and didn't stop. She told it the way she'd learned to tell things that mattered in the order they happened, without editorializing, without the small adjustments people made when they wanted a story to land a certain way. She didn't want it to land a certain way. She wanted it to land true. The truck in front of the bar, recognizing the name Whitfield, Hank arriving, the food, the jacket, the conversation, Cole and the others coming into the lot, the sequence of the confrontation, coming out from behind the dumpster, the specific physical sequence of what had happened to her body, the boots scrambling on gravel, Hank's voice in the dark. Burnett listened without interrupting. When Wren finished, she asked 4 clarifying questions, all specific, all smart. Then she turned off the recorder. Ms. Calloway, she said, you're aware that Cole Whitfield's attorney has already filed a motion questioning your credibility as a witness based on your housing status. That motion was answered this morning, Ray said from the corner. I'm aware of that, Burnett said. She looked back at Wren. I'm also aware of 2 prior incidents involving Cole Whitfield that were never prosecuted. I've had those files pulled. A pause. Your testimony, combined with the camera footage and the corroborating statements from both co-defendants, is the strongest case this office has had on this individual. Wren said, will it actually go to trial, or will Whitfield money find a way? Burnett's face did something careful. The district attorney on this case does not respond well to that kind of pressure, she said. I'll leave it at that. She left. The room felt more real after she was gone, more weighted. The abstraction of what Wren had done had been replaced by the specific solidity of formal process. She had given a statement. It existed in a recording. She existed in that recording as the person who had stayed. Then Ray said the thing that changed the shape of what she thought the morning was going to be. "There's something you need to know," he said. She looked at him. "Hank made 2 calls from the alley. The first one was to me." Ray looked at Hank briefly, then back at Wren. "The second was to the club's attorney, a man named Walter Briggs. He's been practicing law in Arizona for 30 years. Wren looked at Hank. "You were on the ground." "I know where I was," Hank said. "You were barely conscious." "I had a window," he said, "a few minutes before I went out again." His voice was matter of fact, like he was describing a thing that any person would have done, which was its own particular form of extraordinary. "I called Ray and I called Walter. I told Walter there was a girl, that she needed to be a person on paper before anyone had a chance to make her into something they could use against her." The room went very still. "Walter's been working since midnight," Ray said. "Emergency replacement Social Security card application is filed. He's been in contact with the state ID office, the documentation chain that makes you a verifiable, legally substantial person in the state of Arizona. He started that last night." A pause. "By end of business today, you'll exist on paper the way you exist in fact." She looked at Hank. She didn't have words for it. She tried to find some and came up empty. "You did that," she said, "while you were lying on the ground." "I had a few minutes," he said, "and I had a phone." "Hank, don't," he said gently. "Just let it be a thing that happened." She let it be a thing that happened. She looked at the ceiling and breathed carefully and let the weight of it move through her without trying to manage it or redirect it or reduce it to something smaller than what it was. A man she'd known for 4 hours had lain on a concrete alley floor, half conscious, and used his last window of clarity to make sure she couldn't be erased. Not because he owed her anything, not because of any calculation, because he had decided it needed to be done and he was the one who could do it. She had not had anyone decide something for her that cost them anything in a very long time. She had not had anyone act in her direction out of anything except what was required or what was convenient or what made them feel good about themselves. She breathed carefully, both lungs working, both sides, and she let herself feel the full size of the thing without flinching away from it, which was something she was still learning how to do. Outside, the sound of the club kept going, steady and sustained, the frequency of something that had decided to stay. Carol Pittman's house announced itself through smell before Wren reached the door. Coffee and something baking, the warm, bread-specific kind of smell that operated directly on the part of the brain that remembered being taken care of. Not the memory of it exactly, because Wren didn't have a clean version of that memory to draw from. Something older than memory, something that lived below the level of conscious experience in the body itself, in the part of a person that recognized warmth before the mind had time to be skeptical about it. Carol opened the door before they reached it. She was 61, shorter than Wren by an inch, with dark hair going silver, and the particular energy of a woman who had decided at some point that efficiency was a moral position and had never reconsidered. She looked at Wren the way a person looked at a problem they had already begun solving, top to bottom, taking in the jacket, the careful way she moved the slight forward lean that protected the left side. "You need to eat something real," Carol said, "and then you need to sleep in an actual bed. That's what's happening today. Come in." No preamble, no ceremony, just a door open and a direction given delivered with the same matter-of-fact quality as a weather forecast. Wren looked at Hank. "I told you," he said. She went in. The spare room had a real mattress and 2 quilts in the particular colors of something made to last rather than to impress, and curtains that blocked the morning light completely, and a nightstand with a lamp and a glass of water that Carol had placed there in advance. That last detail, the glass of water already there, already thinking ahead to when she would need it, hit Wren somewhere private and unexpected. Not a big thing. The smallest possible thing in the practical accounting of gestures. but it had required someone to think about her specifically, to think about what she would need before she needed it to act on that thought without being asked. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hand carefully against her left side and breathed. From the kitchen, she could hear Hank's voice low and even, the familiar register of it, and Carol's voice answering practical and warm in alternating measure. Two people who knew each other well, moving through a familiar space with the ease of a long-established pattern. The sounds of ordinary life assembled around her like something she was being allowed to stand inside. She had not been inside sounds like that for a very long time. Cal appeared in the doorway. He was enormous as advertised. A shepherd with the build of something that had grown past its original specifications and the expression of an animal who had not been informed a guest was coming and was now conducting his own independent assessment of the situation. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at her with the focused attention of a creature making a genuine decision. "Hey," she said. Cal walked in. He sniffed her hand with the thoroughness of someone consulting a document. He determined something satisfactory. Then he lay down on the floor beside the bed with a heavy final thump that communicated he had decided this was his post now and was not open to renegotiation. She lay back carefully. She looked at the ceiling. The curtains blocked the morning light, but she could feel the day outside, the particular quality of November light pressing against fabric, the muffled sound of the world going about its business. She closed her eyes. She slept for 4 hours without interruption. Not the fractured half-sleep of 8 months on pavement and cardboard, always one sound away from the surface, always monitoring. Real sleep, the kind that had weight and depth and took her somewhere she didn't have to manage anything. When she woke, the glass of water was still there. Cal was still there. The sounds from the kitchen were still there. Nothing had changed. Nothing had gone wrong while she was under. She lay still for a long time, just verifying that. The weeks that followed were not simple. She understood this about recovery early, that it was not a straight line from broken to whole, that it doubled back on itself and stalled, that there were days her body presented genuine progress and days it filed a different position entirely. The ribs were patient about reminding her they existed. She used the spirometer Dr. Kellerman had sent her home with 10 times an hour, which had sounded excessive until she understood that a lung that didn't practice expanding quietly stopped doing it right. She did the breathing exercises. She managed the pain with the particular focused attention she had always been good at applying to things that required it. She slept in the room with the 2 quilts and the curtains and Cal on the floor. Walter Briggs called 3 times in the first week. His voice on the phone was the same as it had been in person, precise, economical-oriented, entirely toward the next necessary thing. The case was moving. The district attorney had formally declined Hargrove's initial request for reduced charges. Cole Whitfield was being held without bail, pending a hearing that Richard Whitfield's legal team had already attempted to delay twice. Both delays had been denied. Hank came for dinner on Tuesdays and Fridays. Carol cooked enough for 6 people and put the good bowls out, which Wren had learned was Carol's way of marking an occasion without announcing that she was marking it. They sat at the table, her Hank, Carol, and talked about ordinary things. Road conditions on the stretch between Kingman and Needles. A mechanic shop in Bullhead City that did good work on older bikes. The cold snap moving in from the north. Cal's ongoing and deeply held opinions about afternoon television programming. Nobody asked her how she was doing in the way that required a performance. Nobody looked at her with the particular weight of people waiting for her to be fixed. They just ate and talked, and the meals accumulated, and something she hadn't had a name for began to feel like something she could almost trust. She was starting to understand what Hank had meant about family. Not the concept of it, she'd always been able to understand the concept. The texture of it, the way it wasn't an event or a declaration, but a thing that assembled itself in small repeated moments that didn't require anyone to announce what they were doing. Tuesday dinner, Friday dinner. A glass of water placed on a nightstand by someone who had thought ahead. Cal's weight on the floor beside her bed, steady and certain as furniture. 3 weeks after the hospital, Ray came to the house alone. He sat at Carol's kitchen table with a coffee cup, and he put a folder on the table between them, and he said, I need to talk to you about something. She sat across from him. Her ribs had downgraded from acute to chronic, which Dr. Kellerman had told her was progress. It felt like being reminded of them at slightly longer intervals, which was its own form of progress. The club has a scholarship fund, Ray said. It's been running for 12 years. Kids of members, kids of people connected to the club, sometimes people we decide should be included. It covers tuition, books, housing. It's not a loan. She looked at the folder. There's a community college 15 minutes from here, he said. Strong nursing program, strong trades programs, whatever direction you want to go. He paused. Walter has also identified a victim's compensation fund through the state that covers your medical bills in full and provides a support stipend during trial proceedings. She was quiet for a moment, sitting with the shape of what he was describing. A direction. A path that didn't require moving in the direction of a way. Hargrove called, Ray said then. Richard Whitfield's attorney. He's proposing a settlement. She looked up. Compensation for medical bills. A structured payment for pain and suffering. Ray's voice was level. In exchange for you and Hank declining to cooperate with the prosecution. The silence in the kitchen was complete. Same thing Whitfield money has done twice before, she said. Yes. She thought about the woman she didn't know, the college student. 2 times the machinery had run and purchased a result, and the people on the other end had walked away with a check and a silence, and Cole Whitfield had walked away with 23 years of confirmed belief that the road had no end. It's your call, Ray said. Not mine, not Hank's. The offer is on the table and you have the right to take it. What does Walter think? Walter thinks you win at trial. He thinks the footage alone is sufficient. He thinks Garrett and Leland's testimony makes it an overwhelming case. Ray paused. He thinks Cole Whitfield is going to prison. The question is only how long. And if I take the settlement, Hargrove negotiates the charges down. Cole pleads to something minor. Minimal time, if any. His record gets managed. Yes. And the 2 people who came before me don't get any accounting. Ray didn't answer. He didn't need to. She had known her answer before he finished the sentence. She'd known it the moment he said the word settlement, felt it settle into place in her chest, with a particular clarity of something that had already been decided at a level below conscious thought. She thought about what it meant to say no when you had $14 and 2 cracked ribs and an address that existed on paper for the first time 3 weeks ago. She thought about what it meant to be the girl from the alley, the girl who had been invisible for 8 months, the girl nobody had been looking for, deciding that she was willing to be visible publicly, officially, on the record for people she had never met who had been hurt by the same hands before her. She thought about Hank calling Walter Briggs from the concrete of an alley in the dark. No, she said. Tell Hargrove no. Ray nodded once the way a man nodded when he had hoped for something and it had arrived. I want to testify, she said. I want to sit in front of that jury and I want to tell them exactly what happened. I want them to see me. They'll see you, Ray said. Good. Then came the morning Richard Whitfield held his press conference. She heard about it from Ray, who arrived at Carol's house the following day and sat at the kitchen table and read from his phone in the flat, careful voice of a man delivering information he found personally contemptible. Richard Whitfield had stood in front of cameras and described his son's arrest as a targeted political prosecution facilitated by organized criminal elements with an agenda against his family's business interests. He had claimed that Hank had initiated the confrontation. He had referred to Wren by name publicly on camera as an associate of a known criminal organization who had been placed at the location prior to the incident. She listened to all of it. She let it finish. Then she said, "He just handed Walter the case." Ray looked at her. "He went on record," she said. "He publicly identified me as a criminal associate while I'm the named victim in an active assault prosecution, and I've already given a recorded statement to the police. That's defamation. That's on camera. That's going to be in every news archive in the state by tonight." She paused. "Walter is going to love this." Ray looked at her for a long moment. "I already called him." "What did he say?" He said, and I want to be precise here. Ray glanced at his phone. Richard Whitfield just made my year. Something shifted in her. Not triumph, it wasn't that clean. Something more like the first real breath after a long submersion. The recognition that the machinery that had run against the woman she didn't know and the college student she didn't know had just exposed itself publicly and permanently, and that she was not the person it could erase anymore. She was in the record. She had a name that existed on paper. She had a statement that was already filed. She had Walter Briggs, who had spent 30 years learning exactly where to cut, and Richard Whitfield had just handed him a new instrument. For the first time since the alley, she felt something that was adjacent to power. Not the power of money or connection or inherited confidence. Something quieter and more durable. The power of a person who had decided to be seen and could not be unseen. Walter Briggs arrived at Carol's house 6 days before the trial. She had met him twice before, once at the hospital, once by phone, but seeing him in a setting that was not a medical room or a voice through a receiver gave her a clearer understanding of what he actually was. He was 62, silver-haired, wearing a suit that fit without making a statement about fitting. He had the eyes of a man who was always working the room, even when the room was Carol's kitchen, with a shepherd taking up the floor. He sat across from her with a legal pad and a pen and said, "Tell me everything. Start from when you first noticed the truck in front of the bar." She told him everything. The same fundamental truth she told Detective Burnett, delivered the same way, in the order things happened, without ornamentation, without the small editorial adjustments people made when they wanted a story to produce a particular effect. She had no interest in effect. She had interest in accuracy, which was what had kept her alive for 8 months, and which was the only currency she'd ever been able to fully trust. He wrote without looking up. When she finished, he asked his questions, specific, surgical, aimed at the exact places Hargrove would try to enter. "You never verbally threatened any of the 3 men?" "No." "You never made physical contact with any of them?" "No, I put myself on the ground over Hank, that was all." "Good." He made a note. "Hargrove is going to argue mutual combat. He'll try to establish that Hank initiated, that the confrontation was reciprocal in nature. The fact that Garrett Foss put his hand on Hank's motorcycle after being told twice not to is documented on camera, but Hargrove will try to build a timeline in which provocation is ambiguous." He looked at her directly. "Here is what is not ambiguous. You, a girl of less than 90 pounds with no prior connection to any party, no weapon, no history of conflict with any of the 3 men, placed your body over an injured man to shield him and sustained serious physical injury as a result. There is no version of mutual combat that accommodates you." He said it the way he would say it to a jury, clean and final. "You're the case," he said. "Not Hank, not the motorcycle, not the patch. You are the case. Hargrove is going to try to make you into something he can take apart. He's going to use your housing history, your lack of a fixed address, the 8 months of moving through towns with no documentation." He paused. "And then I'm going to show the jury footage of a girl with no stake in anything taking 2 boot kicks to her ribs to protect a man she'd known for 2 hours. And I'm going to ask them, what kind of person does that? And I'm going to let them answer." She found herself trusting Walter Briggs not because he was warm, he was not particularly warm, but because he was completely structurally on her side. Not from sympathy, from conviction. He had decided her case was right, and he was the kind of man who committed fully to what he decided. The trial began on a Tuesday. Walter in a courtroom was a different instrument than Walter in a kitchen. Everything about him sharpened. He moved through the space with the precise economy of someone who had spent 30 years learning which square foot of floor to stand on to make a point land correctly. His opening statement ran 11 minutes, and by the end of those 11 minutes, the jury understood 3 things with complete clarity: what Cole Whitfield had done, who Ren Calloway was, and why those 2 facts together constituted something that did not have an innocent explanation. Hargrove tried the housing history angle. Walter redirected to the state ID issued before the ink on the police report had dried, and the emergency documentation chain that had made Ren Calloway a verifiable person before Hargrove had filed his first motion. Hargrove tried the gang affiliation angle. Walter played the recorded statement Wren had given Detective Burnett at the hospital, made before Wren had known the full significance of what was on Hank's vest, and demonstrated that her account had never changed by a single syllable from that recording to this courtroom. Hargrove tried the mutual confrontation angle. Walter played the footage from the security camera on the building across the alley. He played it without commentary. Then he played it again. He let the jury watch Garrett Foss's hand go to the gas tank after two clear warnings. He let them watch what happened after. He let the footage speak in the silence he had prepared for it. Garrett Foss testified for the prosecution on the second day. He was pale and specific and did not look at Cole once during his testimony. He confirmed every element of the event in sequence: the approach, the words exchanged, the contact with the motorcycle, the fight, the kicks. He confirmed who had initiated each element. He confirmed the sequence with the precision of someone who had made a decision to be accurate and was following through on it. When Walter asked him why he had chosen to cooperate fully with the prosecution, Garrett was quiet for a moment. "Because she didn't do anything," he said. His voice was quiet and not entirely steady. "She was just there. She wasn't involved in any of it. She just didn't want to watch someone get hurt, and we kicked her for it." He paused. "That's not something I can sit here and defend." There was no sound in the courtroom when he said it. Wren testified on a Thursday. She had been in the building for 2 hours before she took the stand in a small room with Walter, who had spent those 2 hours not coaching her answers, but preparing her for the architecture of what was coming. The specific moves Hargrove would make, the angles he would try, the places he would look for a seam to press. She sat in the chair and looked at the jury. 12 people pulled from their ordinary lives to sit in this room and make a decision about something that had happened in an alley on a November night. She looked at them one by one briefly, the way you looked at people when you were telling them something true, and you wanted them to know you understood they were receiving it. She looked at Cole once, at the beginning to locate him. He was at the defense table in a suit that fit the way expensive things fit when someone else had decided on them. The architecture of his face was the same, the jawline still there, the construction unchanged. But the thing that had inhabited all of it, the absolute certainty that rooms arranged themselves around him, was absent now. The suit was wearing him. What remained was a young man who had arrived at the end of a road and did not know how to exist there. She looked at him for that one moment. Then she looked at Walter and she answered his questions. She told the jury about the system she had built for surviving. She told them about Kingman, about the alley, about the $14.60. She told them about Hank arriving, the sound of the bike, the 3 words, the food, the jacket, the conversation that had treated her like a person. She told them about recognizing Cole from the truck in front of the bar, and what she had remembered about the name Whitfield, and why she had known, when that truck pulled into the back lot, what was likely coming. She told them about coming out from behind the dumpster. She didn't perform it. The emotion was present and genuine, and she breathed through it and kept going. She described the specific physical sequence, the first kick, the second, the rib that gave on the second. She described staying. She described Hank's heartbeat under her ear on the concrete of a November night. Hargrove cross-examined her for 35 minutes. He tried the housing history. She answered directly. Yes, she had been unhoused for 8 months. Yes, she had no fixed address at the time of the incident, no prior relationship with Hank Dillard, had never met any member of any motorcycle club before that night. He tried the angle that she had inserted herself into an altercation that didn't involve her. Yes, she said. That's correct. A man was being beaten by 3 men, and I made the decision that I wasn't going to watch that happen. He asked why she hadn't called the police instead. I didn't have a phone. He asked why she hadn't gone to the diner for help. I wasn't willing to leave him to do that, she said. Hargrove let that sit. He appeared to be waiting for the jury to find something in it he could use. He looked at their faces and found nothing that helped him and moved on. He tried 3 more angles. Each one met the same thing, her account unchanged, specific, unembellished. The truth told the way she had learned to tell things that mattered. There was nothing for him to grab onto. She had not invented anything. She had not shaped anything. She had simply described what had happened with the precision of a person who had spent 8 months surviving on accuracy, and that precision had nowhere to go except straight into the record exactly as it was. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on all counts. Cole Whitfield stood when the verdict was read. He stood because you stood. He received it, received the full and complete weight of a consequence that had no purchased exit, and she watched him the way you watched something finally arrive at its correct destination after a long and wrong detour. Not with satisfaction exactly, with something quieter, the particular stillness of a thing that has been set right. He was sentenced 4 weeks later. 4 years Arizona Department of Corrections. Walter had pushed for the high end of the guidelines and had the case to support it. Garrett and Leland each received 18 months suspended contingent on community service and behavioral probation. Hargrove filed an appeal within the hour which Walter had anticipated and prepared for, with the unhurried certainty of a man who had not left soft walls anywhere in the structure. Richard Whitfield's defamation case moved to a separate civil proceeding. Walter described the prospect of it with the small, precise compression of expression that Wren had learned to read as genuine pleasure. That evening, Ray came to Carol's house. He came through the door with a paper bag and the particular quietness of someone carrying something that had been waiting for the right moment. He set the bag on the kitchen table. "The guys outside the hospital that night," he said, "they put something together. They wanted to give it to you when it was done, when the right thing had happened." She opened the bag, a prepaid phone already activated, a notebook and a pen, a gift card to the pharmacy on the corner, and an envelope. She opened the envelope, $87 in cash. Each bill separate fives and ones and a few tens clearly pulled from individual pockets, clearly the accumulation of whatever people had on them at 3 in the morning on a November night in Kingman, Arizona. She counted it. Then she counted it again because the number was too specific to be random. $87, one for each pound of her. She understood it immediately. Someone had known her weight from the medical intake. And that number had moved through 240 people standing outside a hospital in the dark, and they had done this with it. $1 for each pound of the girl who had covered one of their own with her body and not moved. She held the envelope and did not say anything for a long time. There was nothing available that was the right size for what it was. She set the envelope carefully on the table and looked at Ray, and he looked back at her with the expression of a man who understood the dimensions of the moment and was not going to reduce them. Later that night, Hank came. Carol had made chili and cornbread and set the good bowls out. They ate her Hank Carol and talked about the ordinary things. The weather turning, Cal's detailed and unfavorable assessment of the new mailman, a stretch of Route 66 that was being repaved and would improve the ride considerably come spring. After dinner, Carol found something to do in another part of the house. The efficiency of it was so precise that Wren understood it had been coordinated in advance. She and Hank sat at the table with their coffee cups. Cal positioned himself between the kitchen and the living room with the strategic awareness of a creature who understood the geometry of where things happened. Hank turned his cup in his hands. This was a man who had been on this earth for 63 years and had ridden hard roads and built things with his hands and made decisions under pressure that most people would never encounter. And he was working right now to say something that was not technically complicated, but was personally enormous. She didn't rush him. "I've got a room," he said. "At my place, it's not much." He turned the cup. "Window looks out at the neighbor's fence. The closet door sticks. The heater in that part of the house takes about 20 minutes to get going in the morning." He stopped. She waited. "It's yours," he said. "If you want it." A pause. Not temporary, not conditional, not while the trial's going on or while you're still healing up. Just yours. He said the last part the way men said things that were enormous but needed to be housed in something plain in order to be said out loud at all. She sat with it. She thought about the apartment on Euclid Avenue and the chain lock she'd learned to work silently at 11 years old. She thought about the sound of a truck in a parking lot at 2 in the morning and what that sound meant, and how she'd learned to read it from 2 floors up. She thought about 8 months of moving through towns that barely registered her name, gas station burritos and flattened cardboard, and the particular weight of moving through the world without leaving a mark on it, and without it leaving a mark on you. She thought about 3 words delivered without pity in a cold alley. She thought about a turkey melt in a cup of black coffee. She thought about a man lying on concrete, half-conscious, using the last clear minutes he had to make a phone call that was not about himself. She thought about $87 in an envelope. She thought about all of it, and she felt it move through her. The grief and the gratitude which she had come to understand were not as different as she'd once believed, because they were both about the same thing. One about what had been absent, one about what had finally and probably arrived. "The closet door sticks," she said. "Yeah," Hank said. "Been meaning to fix it." "I'll fix it," she said. "I'm good with my hands. Learn to fix things on the road." He looked up at her. Something moved in his face that he didn't try to contain or redirect. It was real and honest, and it made him look exactly like what he was, a man who had found something he hadn't been looking for and was still in the early stages of understanding the size of it. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. Cal, from his position between the kitchen and the living room, let out a single satisfied exhale. The negotiation had concluded to his specifications. They drove out to the desert east of town 2 days later on a morning when the sky was the particular hard blue of late November and the air was cold enough to mean it. The Harley was exactly what it had always been, something built to last, that lasted because he maintained it with unglamorous and consistent attention. She had learned to ride passenger in the weeks since she'd been staying at Carol's, had learned the counterintuitive lean, the way you followed the bike's decisions instead of resisting them, the way trust operated faster than thinking once you allowed it to. They rode east for an hour without stopping and without talking. The desert opened on both sides of the highway, the Joshua trees standing in their angular patience, the rock formations catching the low November light and doing things with it that no other month permitted. She leaned slightly into Hank's back and let the miles happen and didn't try to hold on to any of it, which was how you held on to it. He pulled over at a wide spot on the highway, nothing to recommend it except what was visible from it. The Black Mountains running their long, unbroken line against the western horizon. The sky doing what desert skies did in late morning, which was everything, which was more than you expected every time, no matter how many times you'd seen it. He turned off the engine. They sat in the sudden quiet, which was not actually quiet. It was wind and distance, and the faint sound of a hawk working a thermal somewhere above the ridge. The good kind of not quiet, the kind that didn't need filling. "How are the ribs?" he said. "Better," she said. "Maybe 70%. Good enough to fix a closet door." "Already fixed it," she said. 3 days ago." He knew that. She could tell he knew that and had asked anyway, which was its own kind of thing. He turned slightly and looked at her. She'd come to know this expression. It was the closest he came to open warmth, which wasn't warmth that performed itself, but warmth that simply stayed and refused to leave regardless of whether anyone was watching it. The steadiness of it, the way it didn't require anything from her in return. "You did okay," he said. She knew he meant the trial. She knew he meant more than the trial. "I had good people," she said. "You had yourself," he said. "Don't walk away from that. Nobody made you come out from behind that dumpster. Nobody made you stay." He paused. "That was you." She sat with that for a moment. The highway was empty in both directions. The mountains held their long line against the sky with the patience of things that had been holding it for longer than any person could quite comprehend. "Hank," she said. "Yeah, thank you." She stopped. She had been trying to find the right size for this since the hospital, since the moment in the kitchen when Ray had told her about the phone call from the alley floor. She'd tried in her head many times. Full versions, shorter versions, versions that named each specific thing he had done. None of them were the right size. They all came out either too small or too large, either not enough or more than the moment could hold without collapsing under it. "For cold tonight," she said finally. for saying that instead of move along. He was quiet for a long moment. The hawk found what it was looking for and banked east over the ridge and disappeared into the blue. Cold tonight was the easy part, he said. She leaned her head forward against his back carefully, the ribs still filing their periodic reports, and she looked at the mountains, and she let everything that had happened exist all at once, without trying to organize it or reduce it or make it into something more manageable than what it was. The apartment on Euclid Avenue, the chain lock, the sound of the truck at 2 in the morning, Flagstaff, Wickenburg, $14.60, 91 days, a flannel jacket worn soft, a heartbeat under her ear on the concrete of a November alley, a glass of water on a nightstand placed there in advance by someone who had thought ahead to when she would need it. $87, one for each pound. A room with a window that looked out at the neighbor's fence, and a closet door that no longer stuck. She let all of it be true at the same time, which was something she was still learning to do, and she looked at the black mountains holding their steady line against the sky, and she felt the road through the frame of the bike, and the cold against her face, and the absolute solidity of the man in front of her. 19 years old, 87 pounds, no home once, no name that anyone remembered once, not anymore. When they turned around and rode back west toward Kingman, toward Carol's Tuesday Chili, and Cal's Opinions, in a room with a window and a closet door that she had fixed herself with her own hands, she was not riding toward somewhere temporary. She was not riding toward the next place on the list of places that didn't know her name. She was not moving in the direction of away. She was riding back to something. For the first time in 19 years, Wren Calloway was not invisible. She was not a ghost. She was not the girl behind the dumpster counting her remaining dollars in the dark and waiting for the cold to ease. She was home.